Hey, today we're gonna dig a little bit into a comparison of the American and French revolutions. On the surface, these honestly seem really similar. Both of them were an uprising against the monarchy. Both of them relied on a groundswell from the bulk of the population for support. And after a couple of bumps in the road, both of them resulted in a form of democratic government. And that sounds basically the same thing. The Americans got rid of King George. The French got rid of their king. That seems, fairly the same thing. Honestly, though, these revolutions were remarkably different. They were very, very different. They outside of throwing off the monarchy, they almost have nothing to do with each other. Uh, there are some players that are involved in both, and that's really kind of interesting. But they have a drastically different basis. The American Revolution, like most of us know, was a very top-down affair. The upper classes, those wealthy planter classes, along with some moderately wealthy and learned, really drove this revolution. Think about it. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, both of these guys were wealthy planters. They owned large plantations, sometimes hundreds of slaves. Both of them were fairly successful politicians prior to the revolution. Ben Franklin, he was an educated man. He was a printer, an inventor. Samuel Adams, leader of the Sons of Liberty, he was a politician. He had a master's degree in political science. So these are not at all sort of the common folk that we kind of imagine them to be. Uh, and originally, that leadership class, originally they had called for more rights from the crown, and they had been arguing that they were English citizens and deserved more of a government in voice or voice in government. Sorry, backwards. We'll hear similar arguments from the French later on, but that's really what they were wanting. They were wanting more of a voice in government, that they considered themselves equal to the British citizenry. Um, the crown balks at that. They refuse, and that convinces a lot of the North American public to support the independence movement. And that leadership cohort is going to argue that they've outgrown the role of a colony and they're willing and able to rule themselves. And so that's kind of where this comes from. The leadership class after the revolution is going to be the leadership class of before the revolution. The same people were in charge for the most part. Um, what's kind of interesting though, and we'll compare this to the French Revolution here in a second, is the breakdown of alignment of colonials during the American Revolution. About one third, 33% of the American colonials actually openly supported the revolution. They supported that independence movement. They were going to benefit possibly from this independence movement. Another third, 33%, were loyalists. They typically would benefit from remaining a colony, from remaining attached to England. And another third, the last 33%, argued that they were neutral. And the other two, they're interesting in their own right, but they both know kind of where their bread is buttered. And so we sort of understand why partly where their motivations come from. The neutrals, though, are the ones that I'm particularly interested in. They're a little bit harder to figure out, and most of them claim that after the war they were secretly patriots. They claimed that they supported independence, but they couldn't be open about it because they feared retribution by the British. And a lot of historians buy that. And it does make some sense. I mean, if you're openly supporting the British and you live in a territory that, or I mean, sorry, if you're openly supporting the rebellion and you live in a territory that's sort of a British stronghold, you need to keep your mouth shut. You need to kind of keep everything on the down low. I particularly don't buy that these people were secretly patriots. Um, think about this. What do you think they would have said if the British would have won? I'm one of those people that, and it's understandable that people do this. I'm one of those people that, kind of think that most people are there to save their own hide, and that's understandable completely. And so I strongly suspect that those people that came out after the war and said, hey, I was secretly a patriot the whole time, that's because the Patriots won and they won their independence. If the British would have won, I strongly suspect that those same people would have said, hey, we were loyalists the whole time. We really wanted the crown to win. We just couldn't because, there's these crazy yahoos, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson running through the countryside. Uh, and so I feel like those people were honestly, they were hedging their bets. And so they were just kind of looking out for themselves. And that's an understandable thing to do. But once the revolution concludes, though, most of the people in the United States, things pretty much continued as normal. Those wealthy planter classes of those politicians that were influential and had a good following prior to the revolution, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, those same guys are going to be the ruling class after the revolution. The laboring classes, the poor classes, they're still in their station after the revolution. Not a lot's changed for those folks. You still have to pay taxes. One of the big arguments that we like to argue about the revolution is no taxation without representation. Well, we're still paying taxes. It's not like taxes go away magically at the conclusion of the revolution. We're just paying them to a different government. There's going to be some uproar about that, but it's about the same. And practices of government are going to stay the same for the most part after the revolution. Eventually, awesomely, we will move to a greater sense of equality. Voting rights for men will open up in the 1820s. Prior to the 1820s, only propertied white men could vote. After the 1820s, it opens up to universal white male suffrage. So all white males are allowed to vote in the 1820s. We're going to adopt gradual emancipation early in the northern states, getting rid of slavery in the northern states. After the Civil War, we get rid of slavery altogether. And early on, we're going to see a little bit of an increase for women's rights, and that'll conclude, or not really conclude, but make a substantial progress milestone in the 1920s with women's suffrage. But, all of those things take a while after the revolution has already concluded. And so a lot of people are in the same situation that they were in prior to the revolution. We don't radically change society. It's not really what most people would think of as a revolution. The American Revolution was really more of an independence movement. This was breaking away from England. We're not going to change the way our society works. We're going to do the same things. The French Revolution starts with similar ideas. And they start with a desire for equality in France, though. And the big issue, though, for France with them is starvation. Prior to the French Revolution, there is a tremendous issue of starvation, and class structure is really going to play into that. In France right now, there are three social classes, and they're called the three estates. The first estate, that's the church. It's about 0.5% of the population, very tiny amount of people. The second estate, that's the nobility, and that's only about 1.5% of the population. And a big thing to remember about the first estate, the church, the second estate, the nobility, neither two of those pay any taxes whatsoever. The third estate is everybody else, and they pay all of the taxes. And the other two, the church and the nobility, basically live lives of luxury on the backs of the third estate, the commoners. A problem that's going to pop up that's going to edge us very quickly toward the revolution. In 1788, the French king raised taxes after a couple of very costly wars. And that's normal. We raise taxes after the wars. American Revolution, after some back and forth issues, we will raise taxes to pay for that. But the problem is that France is in the middle of a famine. And so we're about to raise taxes at the same time that agricultural products, the cost of those things are through the roof. And so, unlike the American Revolution, where Americans are basically wanting home rule, the population in France is actually starving. And so in 1789, in an effort to address some of those issues and hopefully get the commoners to calm down a little bit, the king calls what is called the Estates General. And we're going to call together representatives from each group, the church, the nobility, and the commoners, and we're going to try to solve some of these issues. Well, the problem is that in an Estates General, it sounds great. Every estate gets a single vote. But typically, the church and the nobility, they ally with each other, and they were not interested really in helping out the third estate. And so they're basically going to overrule them. The church and the nobility, they have 2 votes. The commoners have 1 vote. And so the Estates General doesn't really resolve anything, doesn't give any kind of, voice to that third group, the most populous group. And so the third estate had had enough of that. They had seen this before. It doesn't result in any change. And so they declare themselves the National Assembly, and they decide that they would rule the whole country. And they gain more and more control over a few years. A radical element springs out of the National Assembly, led by a character named Robespierre. And Robespierre gains control of the government, and he starts, along with his immediate followers, starts the Reign of Terror. And a major thing in the Reign of Terror is that they enact a law called the Law of Suspects. Anybody that is suspected of being an enemy of the revolution is going to be arrested and probably executed. And so rather than fighting an external threat like the Americans were fighting England, the French are going to turn on themselves. And during the Reign of Terror, where we have this law of suspects, anybody can be accused, it's estimated that about 17,000 French people, nobles, clergy, and even a lot of commoners, are going to be executed. The National Assembly tries to dial that back a little bit, and they attempt to create a limited monarchy. Basically the same thing that we saw in England a lot earlier with the Magna Carta, where we're restricting the rights of the monarchy. Doesn't work though. They do enact the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens. That's really, really similar to the Bill of Rights. And something really, really cool is that one of the authors of the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens was General Lafayette. General Lafayette fought in the American Revolution, and he worked at times with Thomas Jefferson, who was very huge in writing the Bill of Rights and negotiating the U.S. Constitution. Thomas Jefferson helped General Lafayette in constructing that new document for the French. In it, a couple of major things. Everybody is equal under the law. Nobility, commoners, you're both the same according to the law. Nobody is exempt from taxes. Everybody has to pay taxes. We are going to end feudalism. We talked about feudalism back during the Black Death. And we're going to enact what's called popular sovereignty, voting rights for all men, so universal male suffrage in France. This is pretty similar to the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and that's where France is going with this. Unfortunately, the people of France had realized that the revolution had run amok. Robespierre, who was instrumental in kicking off the Reign of Terror, he was even removed from power and executed himself. And so we're executing revolutionaries here. A group of moderates really worked to restrict where the revolution is going. They form a new government called the Directory. The Directory is pretty ineffective and it grows increasingly corrupt. And in 1799, we almost get back to where we started. 1799, military influence grows. Napoleon overthrows the Directory and names himself emperor. And so we're pretty close to back where we started under a monarchy. There's increased rights, which is what this was originally all about, but we're really close to back where we were at the get-go in France. Even though these two revolutions, one of them is more of an independence movement than a revolution in itself, both of these, though, together, after some bumps, held some very clear impacts on the rest of the world. We are going to see a radical spreading of democratic republics, and we're going to move away very quickly throughout a lot of the world away from absolute monarchies, especially in the Western world. Following the French and the American revolutions, Europe as well as South America are going to start throwing off monarchical governments, and most places, Europe and South America again, are going to create some form of a democracy. Not all of them are going to look, close to what's going on in France or the United States, but they're getting there. So both countries also develop a sense of nationalism. What's kind of amusing is France actually does this earlier than the United States. The United States, it's going to take us about 70 years to identify with our country rather than our locality or our region. Most people in the early 1800s identify themselves by their state or region they're from rather than Americans themselves, but they'll get there after the Civil War especially. So it's kind of interesting though to see both of those revolutions play out and what they kind of mean to those people that were involved in them. Thanks.